Welcome to Never Again is Now, a podcast about anti-Semitism. I am Evelyn Markus.
And I am Phyllis Zimbler Miller.
In a time this year when Jews are harassed around the world and Jews in Israel even were slaughtered recently, the Jewish community around the world commemorates the Holocaust on YOM HASHOAH, which this year will be on the evening of May 5 and the day of May 6. For this occasion, we invited Orly Beigel from Mexico City. Orly's mother and my mother were liberated from the Nazi camps at the same moment and the same place. They were liberated by the 30th Division of the 9th American Army. I met Orly in 2015 in Nashville, Tennessee, at the last reunion of the veterans who liberated our moms. In this podcast episode, Orly and I will share with you the stories we heard from our mothers about the Nazi camps. Orly is the founder of Orly Beigel Productions, a company that represents the world's top musicians in Mexico. Orly, thank you so much for coming on our show. Welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm so moved and honored that you have invited me to speak with you and share again the story of my mother and, of course, yours. I think, as you said, in these times that are so terrible, so aggressive, that I personally never thought I would live this, I will be part of this anti-Semitism like it's today. I thought it was a little bit on the history of my mother and my family. And of course, I felt like a child of a Holocaust survivor, like you, the obligation or the need or the responsibility to tell the story of our mother so they're not forgotten. But I feel so honored to be with you. Thank you very much, Phyllis and Evelyn.
So let's start with that account. Where was your mother born? Which country? How old was she when the whatever country you're going to tell us was occupied? And then tell us briefly, when she was in prison and which camps.
Well, my mother was born on a very religious and poor family, like most of them on those days, in a little town that was called Cieszyn, Polski Cieszyn. It was on the border of the old Czechoslovakia. And actually, it was a domain by the Austro-Hungarian people and with Franz Josef. So she actually spoke German at home. My grandfather, because being so religious, he spoke Yiddish as well. But her mother and all the children spoke German. On the first 2 years of the war, she went with her parents and with one brother and one sister that she was 22 years older than her, and she could be her mother. They hide in a little town, in a farm. We don't know the name of the town, but we know from the stories that she said that they hid it there because there were no Nazis in that little town. And then they heard that the Nazis were coming and they hid the mother and the father. But when they came back to pick them up to go to the ghetto, they were not there anymore. We know, and I will do a parenthesis, we know that my grandparents died in Auschwitz because someone that survived Auschwitz and was on the same train like my grandparents heard my grandmother say, "I hope Yeti and Gisela are fine." So she knew that we all already know that they were murdered in Auschwitz. After that little town, they went to Bochnia, to the ghetto Bochnia. And my mother lived with her sister and another 10 people in a kitchen. I think we can't imagine what it is to sleep 2 years, 10 people in one little kitchen. Of an American, now she became American when she survived Auschwitz, Berta Braunhut. And actually, we would go every year to visit her in Los Angeles. And they became very good friends. And my aunt received papers from her husband that was already outside. And he succeeded to escape and had some contacts with the government of Poland. So he sent papers to her to go to the Sonderlager. Sonderlager was the part of the camp of Bergen Belsen that was the special camp. It was a camp that had prisoners that had to be exchanged for Germans in Palestine, and were going to be exchanged maybe for Germans that were in other countries in the world. And when my aunt went to the Gestapo with the papers, because she had to receive the pass, the guard said, wait a second, only you are the only one in the papers. This little one, that was my mother, Yeti, is not in the papers. She said, you know, she's a daughter of another man. My husband doesn't know that I have another daughter. So she caught him in a good mood, or he didn't really care. And he said, you know, another whore Jew, take her with you. And that was the way that my mother could go to Bergen Belsen and not to Auschwitz, because everybody on that ghetto in Bochnia, that it's only 10 minutes from Oświęcim, that's the name in Polish, it's Auschwitz. So they went to the Sonderlager in Bergen Belsen, and they were there 2 years.
Hey, no, we want to catch Evelyn up, but so how old was your mother at this point when she entered the Sonderlager?
She was 17.
Okay, and we're going to talk a little bit more about the Sonderlager and how they were allowed to wear their own clothes as opposed to the uniforms, which is something I want to talk about in terms of explaining to people why but we'll get to that. First, Evelyn,
Okay, sure. When you ask me, I start talking and talking, you know. So you tell me when to stop, because
Evelyn, catch us up, including where your mother was born, etc. Parallel the story.
All right. My mother was born in 1922 in Rotterdam, in the Netherlands. And on May 10, 1940, the Germans occupied the Netherlands, invaded the Netherlands and occupied it, and bombed Rotterdam, which was very scary. My mother always told me. She and her family had the opportunity to go into hiding, but they decided not to do that because it was too risky. About half
Wait, let me explain why it was too risky. Because there were informers. Not only was it risky that the Gestapo could find you, but that people in the Dutch community who were aligned with the Nazis could inform on you. So it was very risky. Keep going.
Well, yeah, a Dutch person could make 7 guilders and 50 cents by bringing a Jew to the Nazi occupiers. So that was an incentive big enough for half of the people Jews in hiding to be betrayed. So they thought it was too risky to go into hiding, and because they had Argentinian papers, my grandfather and also the family lived in Argentina in the 1920s for a couple of years for my grandfather's job. And they had still papers with Argentinian visas. And they thought, like Orly just said, they thought Argentina is a neutral country in this war. And so the Germans may want to exchange us at some point for German prisoners of war. And therefore they will not kill us, but they will keep us alive. So that's our strategy, to obey the Germans and show them our Argentinian visa. And that kept them from being rounded up for quite some time. But in 1943, it didn't help anymore. They were rounded up from their home and brought to jail in Rotterdam. From there to the Dutch transit camp, Westerbork, where my grandfather managed to keep them longer than many others because of the Argentinian papers. Every week when on Tuesday a train was going eastwards to, they didn't know exactly where, but it wasn't good. My grandfather went to the German officers and said, here, look, we have Argentinian papers. Keep us here. You can exchange us if you want for German prisoners of war. But in 1944, they were transported from Westerbork on to Bergen Belsen. And because of their Argentinian papers, they didn't have to go to the regular camp, like where Anne Frank was sent, for instance. They were sent to the Sonderlager, the special camp, which my mother said was horrible, but somewhat better than the rest of Bergen Belsen.
I just wanted to say from the ghetto, if it's okay, because there is something important about what my mother did in the ghetto. She was allowed to work outside of the ghetto, and thanks to that, she was in a factory that made uniforms for the German army, and thanks to that, she could get a little bit more food and all kind of things that she exchanged with the people of the factory. And I just wanted to add that, no?
So now both mothers are in the special camp in Bergen Belsen. And just to clarify, Anne Frank was first in Auschwitz and then sent to Bergen Belsen. So that's why Evelyn talked about the trains going from Westerbork to Auschwitz. Now, they're in this special camp where they're allowed to wear their own clothes. And as I understand it, the men and women are in the same camp, separate barracks, but they can talk to each other at night or something. So it's a different picture. And so both of you tell stories of what your mothers told you about what it was like in that camp.
You want to start, Evelyn, or shall I do?
Okay, I'll start. So my mother told me that two things. And when I say my mother told me, my mother could speak for 2 minutes. She did speak about the camps to us as children, but she would do it for 2 minutes and then it was enough. Then she couldn't go on. So it's snippets that we heard. But what she used to say again and again was two things stood out in the camp. One was in Bergen Belsen Sonderlager. One was the hunger, and the other one was the stench. So she said the hunger, their food on a day was what the Germans called soup, which was water with just one piece of a turnip in it or so. And a small piece of bread, very stale bread. And that was it. Now, what made it, and the other one was the stench, which was unbearable. And so there was no hygiene in the camp available. There was like a latrine and how do you say, the stem of a tree on which they had to hang over and go to the bathroom that way, and it was horrible. They had to walk through the mud with the it was a terrible stench and ice. It was outdoors, ice cold in that winter. They had not enough clothes to keep them warm, so it was the and then the lice that also stood out. The lice and the illness and the enormous amount of dead people around them, and everybody was ill, and almost dying or already dead. And so they also got very, very ill. My mother got tuberculosis, and somebody else in the family, her brother, also, and typhus. They got typhus. So it was illness, stench, hunger, and of course the fear of Germans shooting around randomly and killing people.
And no medicine for typhus and tuberculosis.
No medicine. I'll get to a story about medical care later, but no.
Okay, Orly, go ahead.
Well, of course, a lot of stories are the same because they were in the same camp.
They didn't know each other, by the way.
No, they didn't. No, they didn't.
Mm.
I wish they would.
Yeah.
Talking about what was unbearable and how to cope with it. First of all, I can say that my mother did speak a lot to me when I was very little. And she told me stories that I couldn't understand completely. I can't understand them today when I'm older. But she had the need to speak. And my brother and sister, my sister Shulamit and my brother Michael, that are older than me, and they were born in Israel. We will get how my mother got to Palestine, to Israel. Listened, but I listened the most. I was really interested. A pity that I was too young to record. Well, there were no recordings like today, no? We didn't have the technology like today, but I didn't write. I just wanted to be there with my heart and with my ears and listen to all her stories. She did speak, about the rats, that they were of the size of cats in the barracks. She said that all the time the rats were walking there. Regarding the food, she said, first of all, to take away a little bit the hunger, people would pass recipes. How strange, no? But they will talk about recipes in order to forget about that hunger. But she did tell me two things that were very interesting. That in her barrack, people let her cut the bread because she knew exactly how to cut it and it will last more. That was one. I can't hear you.
The bread for everyone. In other words, she was allowed to, yes, explain.
Yes, the bread for everybody. So she cut the pieces for everybody because she was so fair and she was so good on cutting the bread that it will last more on the day. She did tell me that they gave her 1 egg a year. And the egg had a value. If you kept it too long, it will ruin. But if you kept it too little, the value was less. So that's a story that I always remember because I couldn't leave food in the plate because she will say, they gave me 1 egg in the camp, 1 egg a year. How can you leave food? That was one of the effects, one of many effects of being a second generation. And it's true, the dead that were there, she would tell me that she was so taken away, her dignity and her desire to live, but she fought for that suddenly she heard a little cart coming and she said, wow, the food is coming. Oh no, it's the cart of the dead. If you can get to a point where you say, it's the car of the dead, imagine what is your dignified situation. Now, my mother, talking about the latrines that you spoke about, my mother, because she came from a very poor family and she only had primary school, she could never study more because the war started when she was going to study to be a nurse. She wanted very much to be a nurse. She was in the camp with people that were lawyers, were cultural people, were people not of her class, let's put it that way. People that she would have never been able to meet if she was only in Chechen. So she asked people that had to clean the latrines and said, I will clean them for you. You give me a little bit more piece of bread. And with that other piece of bread, she went and paid the prisoners, because they were all the same. They were only Jewish prisoners. She studied French and English in the camp. So you have from one side stories that are, I don't know how to put it in words, that you can't really understand. But in the other hand, these stories of resilience, of fight for your life, and to be able to do things like my mother that studied English, and French in the camp.
It's amazing. Yeah.
She paid the tutor with the little extra piece of bread. Is that what happened?
Yes, yes. She would pay the lawyer or whoever was there in the bar. And you teach me English. I have this little piece of bread to give you more. And she got that piece of bread. I believe that's the only thing that she did, is cleaning latrines. Because there is a very sad story that I heard. My mother had insomnia. Insomnia because the monsters that she brought with her that never left. And actually, many of them she lent it to me. She left them to me. And so she couldn't sleep. And she said that she couldn't sleep for many reasons, but mainly because of Bergen Belsen. And suddenly one night she woke up at the beginning when she arrived there, because at the end she was really so skinny. She was 30 kilos. And she saw a German caressing her face. The story ended there. That's all what she said. We don't know. I have many questions that they will never be answered. Never. I don't know if you, Evelyn, have questions that never been answered. I see that you have more details, many more details. Maybe because your mother spoke, even if she spoke 5 minutes or 2 minutes, but she told you a lot about it. What do you think?
I don't know. I didn't get the impression from my mother herself that there were things she didn't tell us, but I heard from a friend of hers who lived in the neighborhood, who's still alive, that and who is herself a Holocaust survivor. She said to me after my mother passed away, she said, there are many things she didn't share with you, but she shared with me.
Yeah, I was told by the person that slept with her in the barrack in Bergen Belsen, told me exactly the same.
So that's all I know, and I'm
Yes,
still in doubt. Should I ask for those story or to be
Yes,
told
we
to me,
should.
or should I respect my mother's
Will?
decision not to tell me? I still don't have the answer for myself. But back to the life in the camp. What my mother told me about the Zonderlager was what was one thing that was better than in the regular camp of Bergen Belsen was that with this way too little food that they got, at least they didn't have to work. Whereas in the regular camp, people had the same amount of food, but had to work on top of that. So they got way too less calories in and had to burn more calories than in the Zonderlager. And my mother said that's what kept us alive. We were almost dead. It was especially my uncle, who was younger than she was, and she said a liberation a week later, and some of us would have been dead. So it was very dire. But if we would have had to work in Bergen Belsen, we would have been dead.
Can I ask for a clarification?
Yes.
Bergen Belsen had or did not have gas chambers? It had
It did
crematory.
not.
That's exactly what I was going to tell
Go ahead.
you.
Go
That's
ahead.
exactly how telepathy we have now. I swear, that's exactly what I was going. I wonder why my mother would say that every time, once a month, or I don't know how frequent they will take them to the showers. She thought that gas would come. She
Yes.
didn't know if but there were no gas chambers in Bergen Belsen. It was called the horror camp. It was a horrible camp. People that came from Auschwitz later said that Bergen Belsen was even worse because of the lies, because of the sickness, because there was no water, because there was no hygienic situation, because of many things, no, the rats and everything. But they killed them in a different way than putting them in the gas chamber. So I don't know why. My mother would think that they were gas chambers because
My
they
mother
were
had the
not.
same story. My mother had the same story. The occasional shower was a scary moment,
Yes.
and also because of the German guards peeking at them, they were naked, right? So, but also because they didn't trust the shower. They had the same story. Yeah.
That's
Yeah, and,
incredible.
so what did happen to the bodies at Bergen Belsen? Were there crematoriums then?
No.
When I went now to Bergen Belsen, that I went last year for the first time to Germany, and I went to Bergen Belsen and I found this Sonderlager. They are mounds that you see with grass, and you have plaques there that says 10,000 bodies, 5,000. So I do believe that the bones are there. When the British came to Bergen Belsen, it was horrible what they found. That's why they asked to be filmed. All the films and all the pictures, most of them at least, that you see of these mountains of dead people, they are from Bergen Belsen. They just left them there.
Mountains of people unburied, right?
Unburied.
Unburied. That's
Exactly.
what my mother also said. You had dead bodies around you wherever you walked. They just left them there, or you saw people taking those bodies, prisoners taking those bodies away. There were more dead bodies than they could bury.
And then the British took care of that. That make how do you say in English? Not individual, but collective burials. No?
Okay, so let's clarify now, because your mothers were not liberated at Bergen Belsen, correct? Let's
Correct.
talk
But
about,
let's talk for a moment about what they did to stay alive.
okay.
Right? To what they did to survive physically, but also mentally. So you Orly, you spoke about the recipe conversations they had.
That's for the hunger.
My mother had exactly the same story. At night, they couldn't sleep from hunger, and they would exchange recipes. And
But not on writing, to make everyone clear.
no,
They were
they were
telling
No,
talking.
no.
They were talking about delicious food,
Mhm.
as if they would eat it. And my mother, what she did to keep herself sane was there was no medical care, and there were many ill people. So she made a clinic in her barrack
Wow.
where sick people could come,
Wow.
and then she would take care of them. She would take care of them without medication, without medical how do you say without medical products.
Products.
But she would just, I don't know exactly how she did it, but she was nursing. She was a nurse to them. That was not her education, but she just took care of them.
So I'm sure she didn't nurse only the body, but she nursed the soul, taking care of them and feeling those people that someone is taking care of them.
Yes, someone cares.
And I found a letter we found a letter of her after she passed away in
Wow.
2012. A letter she had written 6 weeks after her liberation. And in that letter, she describes how she sometimes how she would sometimes not be able to take care of her patients because she was ill herself and felt not good enough to do it. But then she would work extra hard after she felt somewhat better. And this is what got her through. You know, it gave her something to do. It gave her some
Purpose.
humanity,
And
some
meaning. Mhm.
right, some human dignity.
What we would call she had agency. Today we'd say she had
Okay.
agency.
Yes.
Yes. And you know, my mother said that besides the hunger that was horrible, the boredom,
Mm.
it was horrible. The hours didn't pass. I can't imagine she was 2 years there. So the good things that happened, besides the recipes, was the classes of English and French. But
Yes.
it depended on how much bread she could get from cleaning the latrines, you know.
So I just realized that in other places where classes were organized, they were not organized in the Sonderlager, even though, I mean, obviously, we're in the part where they had to work, there was no time for classes. But what's interesting is that classes were not informally developed in the Sonderlager. I find that very interesting. Maybe people just at that point no longer had the energy and so few calories.
I'm sure they were not interested or they didn't get bread like my mother got it. I really don't know. That's you added one of the questions to the list that I did have. Thank you very much, Phyllis. I didn't ask her for those things, you know, and it would be interesting to know.
Right. I find that interesting based on other things I've read of other places where classes were organized. And I want to clarify something. When they came to the Sonderlager, they did not go through selection, right? They went directly to the Sonderlager, and the
Exactly.
children were with them. The children were not taken away to special barracks, correct?
The
Children
children,
meaning under the age of, let's say, 10 or 8.
my mother didn't have children, and of course she went with her aunt Gisela Katz, that she was 22 years older than her, so she was like the daughter of
Right.
the no, but my mother was already 17 because
I
she
don't
was
know
2
the
years.
answer. I don't know the answer to that.
Okay, so as we said, there are a lot of things we don't know the answer to. But now let's talk about the day that they were taken out of Bergen Belsen from the special camp. Which one of you wants to describe it first?
We must. I'm sure that you, Evelyn, have more stories. My mother talked about the train, so if you want, I will say what I know about the
Go
dead
ahead.
train.
Yeah.
And also the doubts that I have that maybe, well, I'm sure you will be able to answer. So they were taking to the dead train later. Now, as grown up, I know that there were 3 trains, but that I will leave to Evelyn to speak about. So she was in this train for 4 to 5 days. What she knew is that the Germans were going to throw them into the Elbe River. Whoever knew how to swim, they will be shot. And whoever didn't know how to swim, they wanted to kill everybody in that train.
Okay, wait, we
And-
need to clarify. I know I keep it.
No,
So,
it's perfect, sure.
okay. Your mothers were on the same train because each of those 3 trains that left the Sonderlager had different, supposedly originally the same destination to go. As I understand it, I'm not an historian. They were to go to Theresienstadt, which is Terezin in Czech, and then the 3 trains had different destinations. So
No.
your mothers were on the same train. Is that correct?
Yes. Yes.
They were on the same train because they arrived to Farsleben,
Magdeburg. Yeah.
Magdeburg and Farsleben.
Yeah.
No,
Right,
where
okay.
they met Frank Towers. But
Okay, so I just want to say one train did get to Theresienstadt, I understand. But the train that you're going to talk about never got to its destination, and now you're talking about what they decided to do.
One
the
train, they
people-
don't know where it ended. Is that correct, Evelyn? One
I don't
arrived
know.
in Theresienstadt. There were
okay.
3. The second one, they don't know what happened. And the third one that
Yes,
your
no,
mother
no.
and my mother arrived to
Okay, this is the story as I heard it from my mother, and she wrote it down in her letter.
wow, amazing, incredible.
So, this was the situation. The Bergen, the Allied forces had already reached Hanover, which was not far from Bergen Belsen.
in northern Germany.
And the Germans, the Nazis in Bergen Belsen, wanted to destroy the living evidence of their war crimes and atrocities. So the Jews who could still who were still alive, they wanted to ship them out before the Allied forces would find them, and preferably ship them out somewhere where they would die.
Mhm.
So the plan was to send them to Theresienstadt, where they would die. Where by that time were gas chambers, as far as I understand. By that time. But they were not sure that the trains could reach Theresienstadt, because at the East Front, the Allied forces were also closing in, the Germans. So they had a plan B for the trains, and that was to blow them up on the bridge of the River Elbe. And then what would happen, what Orly just said, if they could swim, they would shoot them. And if they could not swim, they would drown. So my mother describes how they were called to pack and go on a train, and then it was postponed again, and then they were called to leave, and then it was postponed again, and then on April 6th, they were in a train with 2,400 Jews. Now we
How
know
many?
2,400. Your mother and my mother were on a train
24.
with
I knew 2,000, but you're right. Mhm.
2,400 Jews, and the train had how do you say, kettle cars, and it had a person, how do you say, trains for humans.
For animals.
No, for animals
No,
and
for
for
animals and for humans.
Part of it was for humans, part of it was for animals, but the 2,400 Jews were stuffed in all the parts of the train.
Mhm.
Okay, because they were in the Sonderlager, they had the luck to go to have a seat, or not, maybe not a seat, but not to be in a kettle car. But it was a train, and the train, it drove for a few hours, then it stopped for many hours, and it went like that: go, stop, and go, stop, and go.
Can I explain? Part of the reason is that as the Germans were retreating, they would push the train with the Jews off the tracks to keep their what do you call them, troop trains through. So that was part of the reason that
Part of the
Jews,
reason, and there was fighting. There was
And
war
bombing.
going on. There was
Yes,
war
it's all-
going on. So
yes.
they were shot at also.
yes,
Because the Allied forces didn't know who were in the train, right?
exactly.
Sure.
And she described so it was stop and go. There was no hygiene, there was no food or water or whatever. It was horrible, and people died on the train. There were later, I'll come back to the liberation from here, but the other 2 trains that you were talking about, I don't know about the 3rd train, but a second train was stopped, was elsewhere, and there a friend of my mother was on that one, and that one was liberated by the Russians,
Mhm.
and that was the train to Treubitz, and that
Mm.
was East Germany. Okay, so they were in this train, and before it reached the River Elbe, where they probably would have been blown up, um,
And you and me wouldn't be here.
wouldn't be have been here. The train was stopped. The Nazis, commanders of the train, fled with the locomotive, and they got out of the train, and there were the Americans. That was the 30th Division of the 9th American Army, and they were free. This was in Farsleben, which is a village really near to Magdeburg.
I have a little story about this that I have a question as well. I don't know how it happened. My mother said that once the train stopped, she went down of the train. I don't know how she opened the door, but someone told me that they were part of the trains that didn't have doors. They were like very strange, just
The
open.
cattle cars, probably, yeah.
Yeah, and she was looking for potatoes or for something to eat. And suddenly she saw these boots with dust. And she thought the Germans came again. And she turned around and she saw that they were the Americans. And because she knew English, because she learned in Bergen Belsen, she asked them, "Why are you so sad?" And they said, "Because our president died yesterday." That was Roosevelt. And this is the way she knew that on the 13th of April, 1945, she was liberated finally to life.
Amazing.
So,
And Evelyn has told me that growing up, every year her family celebrated, I don't know if that's the right word, on April 13th, the liberation of her mother.
That's
in
right.
my family, no. My mother didn't want to, and only one time I wrote to her as a kid, "Today is the 13th of April. I want to celebrate with you life." And she didn't say anything.
Interesting.
Mhm.
So we're getting close to the end, and I want to make sure that we've covered everything. So do you want to quickly cover what happened after liberation to your mothers? But then I think the important question is the effects that this has had on you. And also, if we can have time for a message for today in these really upsetting times of anti-Semitism.
Huh.
Okay, so Evelyn, do you want to kind of do your part quickly of what happened afterwards?
So, my mother miraculously survived with all of her direct family. That never happened to
Very, very rare.
Holocaust survivors.
That's true.
And she was very ill with tuberculosis. And it took her 6 weeks to get back to the Netherlands. With train here and there, and a car that took her here and there. She found her fiancé back, who was in hiding, had survived in hiding in the north of the Netherlands, hidden by evangelical Christians, and she married him in 1946 when she felt somewhat better, and celebrated life every day after, but could not sit still. She had to do something. She had to be busy. She could not be not busy.
Interesting.
And I remember as a child waking up from the screamings sometimes of the nightmares. And then she would have a nightmare. She would tell us the next day of her being with us, her children, in a concentration camp. And I also remember that my mother liked to eat, liked to cook. She cooked fantastically, and but she would get up at night, in the middle of the night often, and make herself a sandwich. Now,
Interesting.
that could not have been because she felt hungry.
No.
because she would eat during the day a normal amount
Absolutely.
of food. But I think it had to do with that experience of exchange, of feeling so hungry at night in the camp and exchanging recipes.
Mhm.
And she would make her favorite sandwich
Which
in the middle of
was,
the night.
what was,
Which was a whole wheat sandwich with really good Dutch cheese.
interesting. Okay, Orly, what happened?
I will try to make it very short so we have time for the message later. My mother was taken to Buchenwald, that was already, Buchenwald is another camp,
Yes.
that was already liberated by the Americans. And there she was 40 days where she was given medicines and food. And from there, she took a train. Miraculously, we found a video of my mother before taking the train in Buchenwald. She looks very young, younger of what she was. She doesn't have all her teeth. And I always say, I'm just making a small parenthesis. I always say that the Holocaust did not end with the closing of the camps or of the gas chambers. It remained all my life in the melancholy and sadness of the eyes of my mother. There was the Holocaust for me always, and it really affected, but I do believe that we need another blog to speak about the effects on the second generation because it's such a wide theme. So from there, she went to Paris. She arrived to Gare de Lyon, where she always told us about a picture that was taken by an American soldier. And this picture is, if you let me 1 second, there is this picture that they had the flag. I'm showing you this because it became very famous, and they're printing this picture in books and they're
Oh, well,
using.
which one is your mother of the three women?
This is my mother. This is my mother, and she always said that, there were balloons and there were bands and red carpet arriving to the station. So they went out on the window to see who was the celebrity that was arriving. They were the celebrity. And years later, she told me about this picture, and I looked for it in the Library of Congress, everywhere. But finally, luckily, a cousin found it, and now it's going everywhere. Now, after that, they went to Marseille, and from there to Palestine, where she was in Atlit, close to Haifa, in quarantine. And then she was taken to Tel Aviv. She met my father, Yosef Beigel, and the name of my mother was Jetta Halpern before she got married. And my sister Shulamit and my brother Michael were born. And the times in Israel were very hard. It was like the depression, So she told my father, we have family in Mexico. She had family in Mexico. Let's just move there to try with a little bit of effort, we can do something with our life. So they came to Mexico, and well, here I am. I am part of the product of what happened in the ship, in the big ship where they came to Veracruz. And then we stayed years, and I was the first one to go to Israel. And then all the family moved to Israel, and my parents finally moved to Israel as well. So, and regarding the food, that every night I had in the little table close to my bed, a little piece of cake with milk in case I wake up at night with hunger. She did that, and she put it in her bed as well. She didn't do a sandwich, but she had this cake or a little piece of bread. So we have a lot of similar stories. But I do think that the effects on the second generation, I'm not a speaker for the second generation. Each person, depending on their age, sensibility, the stories that were told, is affected in different ways. I can tell you that I still sit with some of the monsters the guilt of not being able to compensate her life for what she had to live. When I'm very happy, suddenly I stop myself because I say, wait a second, you can't be so happy if your mother had to pass what she passed. So, and that was more in my youth. Now I'm much older, so I learned. And of course, you have very close to you the most important person, that it's your shrink. So the shrink really helps to overcome a lot of things. But if you can give me 1 second just to read one little thing that I prepared. Yes. I think we need to fight despair on these horrible times. We need more than ever not to stay quiet, not to be indifferent, because people were so indifferent to what happened, to educate ourselves, to absolutely educate ourselves so we really have intelligent answers. We can answer to all these negacionistas. I spoke in Spanish, all these people that negate, the Holocaust. I have a lot to say, but I'm a promoter in show business, in music. And I just wrote a little sentence, if you may.
Yes, please, go ahead.
I believe in the power of music to transform our lives and allow us to look at the world in new ways. I believe in the force of art to challenge the force of death, to create memory where death imposes us unforgiveness, to offer abundance when pain seems to deprive us of everything. That's why for 40 years, I bring the gift of music and performing arts to and from many corners of the world. Music have healed a little bit my heart. But Evelyn, I have a question that maybe later we will speak about. I am very worried. How do we transmit again and again the story of the Holocaust of our mothers when people don't care anymore, and when people are so anti-Semitic today? How we sensibilize people? If you say sensibilize, it's okay. How you
Sensitize. Yeah. Make
yeah?
people, I know, go ahead,
Be
aware of.
sensitive to this theme
Yes.
of the Holocaust when they are so far away of it. I'm very worried about it. I think we have an obligation as children. We have an obligation to speak about our mothers. No, we need to search our souls and be their voices of our mothers. I think so. So that's, and I have the question. I still have the question. I'm trying to see how to transmit and how not to stop. And today the world, I'm telling you, it's affecting me. I'm half Israeli as well, and my family lives in Israel. And what is happening in Israel and what happened in October 7th is it's horrible. I can't use another word. And but I live in Mexico, and I'm very worried about anti-Semitism. Here is less, but it's starting to be very strong. Look what is happening in the United States.
Yes, that's the scary thing to me these days, is that anti-Semitism for the first time is global.
It's global.
It's global.
Absolutely.
And that I find very scary.
And also
Me
it's
too.
very, I spent a lot of time reading about the interwar period between World War I and World War II. It's so, what's happening now is replicating the lead up to the Nazis. And as an American Jew, I just can't understand why Americans don't understand that their democracy is under threat. Our whole way of life. They think it's, Israel or whatever. And so while I think second generation has an obligation, I also think all Jews around the world have an obligation
Absolutely.
to not only remember the Holocaust, but to get people to understand what it means for their own lives today and how they have to speak up against anti-Semitism and all hate.
It's going to be very hard, and it's harder every day because
Yes.
marketing that has been publicized all over the world. Excuse me?
Propaganda, we would say.
Propaganda. Of course. In Spanish is propaganda also.
Oh,
But we have the testimonies that Steven Spielberg collected all over the world, the testimonies of the survivors, and he stored it in several places deep under the ground, in several places in the world, so that it cannot be destroyed. We have personal stories. I think personal stories will always make people, will touch people and convey some of the horrible the horrible situation of the Holocaust. So we have to keep going out personal stories to the next generations. And of course, the facts should be available for those who are interested in it. And I agree with you, Orly, that we should be able to educate ourselves, to tell other people about it. And I'm most agree with what you both said, Phyllis and Orly, that in these times of global anti-Semitism and the scarily rising anti-Semitism, we need all Jews on deck. We have about 15 million Jews in the world. We need all of us to stop this, help stop this, and we need allies. With 15 million people, you cannot stop global anti-Semitism that is escalating so much. But all hands on deck. No don't fall into the pit of despair. And I think if our stories of our mothers can help in one thing, it's for everybody today, every Jew today, to be inspired, not to despair. Your mother, Orly, took language lessons in Bergen Belsen. My mother set up and ran a one-person clinic
with no medicine.
With no medicine. I mean, they didn't fall into the pit of despair. So we certainly are still in circumstances where we don't need to fall into despair again, but instead fight.
Okay, Orly, I see
they have unspeakable suffering, but also they have magnificent strength. Yes. And we have to hold to that and transmit that strength to other people.
I agree.
I'm scared like you are.
I think that's an appropriate place to end. We could go on for hours, but we wanted this to be a very special episode, which it is. And right, we cannot give up hope and say there's nothing we can do. Evelyn and I started this podcast. Pretty soon it'll be 3 years, because we felt that individuals can and must speak up against anti-Semitism. So I thank
congratulations for this post.
I thank our special guest. I thank Evelyn, my co-host, for joining this time as a guest rather than the host. We thank our listeners. For those of you who want to know more about Evelyn, myself, and our work, you may go to Never Again Is Now podcast at YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. And as we end every recording, we say, speak up against anti-Semitism and all hate.